Communication is what I do. That's what I've always done. My early career was in radio and TV. What I recognized about that later translated into the work that I did when I did my graduate work, was that attention is a very important thing. No matter what our message is, we have to capture and retain attention. It doesn't mean we have to entertain. It doesn't mean you have to be glitzy. But it means we have to engage our audiences. We have a real challenge in the startup world. It's the most competitive space I know of. Who knows how many startups are in Boston? So what that means is there is a lot of competition for the ear, and eventually, if you want to be funded, for the wallet. How are you going to be the one remembered? So it really comes down to this. I don't care how good your technology is. I don't care what great problem that you solve. Unless you have the ability to communicate that to someone else and make them feel that you have a purpose, that you are solving a problem, that you're curing a pain, that you're providing a route to an opportunity, then you really don't need to exist. So you need to do two things. One, you need to really solve a problem or tap an opportunity, but that in itself, you can have the best idea on the planet. But unless you have the ability to communicate your story, to convince somebody how good your idea is, you're like the tree in the forest that falls and no one's around to hear it. I tell people that in the beginning, I don't care what kind of company you are. In the beginning, no matter what your technology is, you need to be a communication company. You need to be a communication person. You've got to be really clear about how you articulate what it is that you do and why that should be important for your audience. So for me, it comes down to a couple of things. Number one is, yeah, absolutely, you need a good technology. You need something that works. But you also need the skill to be able to communicate that to other people, and that's where the idea of whether we want to call it a story, whether we want to call it communication, whatever we want to call it, our ability to get what is in our head, the image, the information, and the passion that we have, is be able to translate that to other people. There appears to be a common issue that most startups struggle with, and that could be a startup that's started by somebody who has a business background, or it might be a startup that comes from someone with an academic background who has a very technical background. One of the problems that we all have is when we are so close to what it is that we do, we see our story from the inside out. We see things that are important to us, but might not necessarily be what's important to the audience. Let's think about the audiences we have. Some people are going to be looking for investors. Some people will be looking for markets. Some people are going to be looking for parts of their ecosystem, whether it's strategic partners or distributors or any number of other people who might be stakeholders in their success. So we've got to communicate what it is we do and ask people for whatever support we want to ask them for, whether it be money or whether it is buy my product. The problem that some of us have, no, I won't say some of us, the problem that we all have is we are always too close to our own content. So we tend to tell people things that we think are important, but they seem to be what's important to us. So when you think about the presentations you hear all the time, and the presentations that generally don't work, and these are the presentations where people give us too much information. So the struggle that people, especially from academia, people who are in a technical area, the real challenge is making sure that we don't go too deep into the weeds. We don't give people so much technical information that we lose them. And when I do the consulting work that I do and when I do the workshops, that's one of the first things I try to get across. And that's generally, there is this idea that we have to tell everyone everything. We want to make someone, and it may be our best intentions. It may be that we just hit everybody with everything and we figure they're going to figure it out. We want to make them experts. No, in the beginning, whether you're talking with an investor or whether you're talking with someone in the marketplace, you've got to rouse their interest. You've got to tell them enough so that the follow-up is, okay, tell me more. So my feeling is we always should start out by telling people a little less than we want to tell them. If you tell people too much, they're going to glaze over. But if I don't tell you enough but I have you engaged, you're going to ask a question. And the minute you start asking a question, I know I have your interest. So one of the guidelines that I try to set up in the work that I do, and I do workshops where we actually train people on some of these principles, is to define a strategy, take a look at your content, and make sure that it is a high enough level that you don't lose people, and explain it in a way that communicates two things. Number one is the basic information you want to get across, and number two, you are also communicating through the way you deliver your image, that image of credibility, that image of trust, that image of clarity. Keep in mind, every time you do a presentation, people are judging you, and they are making decisions, and if they don't follow you, if you have lost them in the weeds, that's a reflection of not only your product, but it's a reflection on you. And keep in mind, in the startup world, where a lot of people at this point are, investors are buying more than just your idea. They're buying more than your technology. They're buying you, and you need to be someone that they have confidence in. And part of that confidence comes from the clarity and the passion and the credibility and the commitment that you deliver through that interaction that you have with them. And that is once again why I say that story or communication is really at the core of almost everything that we do. So be good at what you do. Make sure your technology works. Make sure you're not a solution in search of a problem. You have something that really needs to exist in the cosmos. But be able to very clearly tell people why that's important to them. Get them to nod, get them to say, okay, now tell me more. Startups think that their communication tool, they need an elevator pitch and then an investor deck. And while there's some value to that, I think we're short-changing people if we have startups think that that's their communication. The model that I've developed and the direction that I'm trying to push people toward is that those are just two of the elements of a larger communication strategy that you need. At the center of all this is what I like to call the core story. What's your persona? Who are you? I could have you go through a whole day workshop, and that would be great. Love to see you there. But let me reduce my whole day into a few sentences, so you can save yourself a day and maybe a couple of dollars. The most important question that a startup is going to answer, one question. If you answer this, and you've answered it well, you have a very good chance of being called back for another meeting, selling your product, getting people interested. Here's the question you need to answer. What do you do? Now, I ask people all the time, I say, what do you do? And they give me this really technical answer, and when they're done, I want to say, oh, that's very interesting. I only have one follow-up question. What do you do? I don't get it. We tell people sometimes what we do in terms of, it sounds either too general or too technical, but it doesn't align with an audience. So, I'm going to reduce what do you do to three things. You are answering number one. When somebody says, what do you do? They're not really saying, what do you do? Because that's about you. They want to know, what do you do and how does that affect me? So here's the answer. The what do you do is answered with three things. Number one, why do you deserve to be in the cosmos? What's the problem that you're solving? What's the opportunity that you're tapping? Number two, that's what you do. Why is it important to me? If I'm an investor, why is that important to me? If I'm potentially a customer, a client, a user of your application, well, if I'm one of those, you want to make my life easier, better, jump higher, run faster. You want to make my life better. And that's for the end user. What's interesting is the what's in it for me. Why should I care? For an investor is very different. The investor sometimes doesn't care if you're making, a specific app. They want to know, is there a big enough market out there that's going to make me money? Are you a good investment? So, number one, why do you deserve to be the cosmos? What's the problem you're solving? Number two, why should your audience care? And then when you do that, then you go to number three, which is, okay, now what do we do that's going to be in our mutual best interest? And if you can answer those three things, you would then have a very effective, persuasive presentation. There's a lot of noise out there. If you can answer that question and answer it better than the other 70,000 other startup companies that there are just in the Boston area alone, then you have a fighting chance to be the one that an investor might call back to a second meeting. You might have a fighting chance of somebody who's a potential customer say, yeah, I want one of those. So we can reduce our one-day workshop into a couple of sentences. Just work on it, make sure that you are as good talking about what you do as what your product is. Don't let academia get in the way of you being successful. It's another world. It's a different world. It's a different way to communicate. And one of the problems that I see people coming from academia is that we're still always teaching. And that in the business world, that's not what we ought to be doing. We need to be engaging. We don't need to make people experts. We don't need to tell people too much. So in terms of being an academic, sometimes we have to start thinking like a non-academic, and we have to get out of our own way and make sure that the tendency is to tell people a lot of stuff, is to make them educated, make them smarter. And we do that by giving them a lot of stuff. It gets worse and worse as we got more and more up the technical ladder. So people who come out of a highly technical field spend way too much time in the detail and in the weeds. Understand your audience. Understand what level of detail your audience wants. And once you figure that out, make it even less detailed. Because keep in mind, if you've engaged somebody and they are really interested and you haven't told them enough, what are they going to do? They're going to ask you a question. On the other hand, if you tell people too much, if you tell people everything that you know, if you download just a bunch of stuff thinking I'm doing you a favor by giving you all of this, and you'll figure out what's in your best interest. Your audience doesn't want to do that kind of heavy lifting. You'll lose them. Tell people, engage people, and leave them wanting more, so they're going to ask a question. On the flip side of that, don't tell people so little that they still have no idea what it is that you do. So the words that I'll leave you with is simplicity, yet be comprehensive and clear enough. You need to make sure when somebody says to you what is it that you do, which ultimately is the most important question, that you're not so vague. Well, we make life easier for the Western civilization. Well, that's a little vague. I'm not sure what that means. On the other hand, I want to hear, we're a multi-channel curated mobile app. By that time you've lost me. start by defining why you exist, the problem you're solving, and then kind of fill it in from there. Make sure I know what it is that you do, but not in so much detail that I'm lost in the weeds. I'll leave you with this thought. I think the entrepreneurial space is the most exciting place that I've worked with large global companies, domestic and global companies, Fortune 500 companies, some local large organizations. It's great. They have budgets. What I'm finding, though, is that the passion, the enthusiasm, the great idea, innovation, the most exciting place that I've worked probably is this innovation space. So there are great opportunities, and I think that people just need to figure out how to tap them and to sometimes get out of their own way. Because, again, our feeling is we want to tell everyone everything that we do. That's our story. Let's forget about telling our story. We can be the subject matter, but we have to tell our audience's story. We have to tell the investor or the market why what we do is important to them. What I think we need to do beyond an elevator pitch, I think what we have to focus on is how can we create what I like to call a core story. How can we create something very brief, very consistent that gets someone's attention? The purpose of an elevator pitch is not to tell everyone everything or to tell them what's interesting to you, but it's to create that 40,000 foot view that simply says, here's why we need to exist, and here's why you should care. So an elevator pitch, the only purpose of an elevator pitch is, and I'll say that it's not to change what people know. It is simply to get someone to say, I want to talk more. Tell me more. So in a couple of brief moments, let me give you a couple of insights about what I think you should think about when you're doing an elevator pitch. And I don't care if you're a startup company or whether you're an individual looking for a job, or whether or not you're an academic looking for funding or some other opportunity. The purpose of an elevator pitch is to raise the interest of whoever your stakeholder is, whether that is someone who is going to fund you or hire you. First of all, explain in a very, very brief way, not just here I am, this is what I do, but why it's important for whoever you're talking to. So you've got to have them picture in their mind that there is a need out there. A solution without a need is a waste of everyone's time. So try to focus your introductory statement on not immediately what it is that you do. We have a technology that turns horses into unicorns. No, we want to start with the idea of what is the problem out there and how very quickly you can articulate how you can solve it. So I'll leave you with this. From my own perspective, I think that the most important question that anyone is going to answer in this startup world is, what do you do? If you can answer that question, I think you've got a very, very good shot at getting more attention and moving closer to where you want to be. First of all, in an elevator pitch, nobody's going to give it funding, nobody's going to hire you, nobody's going to do anything except, in the best case, say to you, that's interesting, let's meet again. So if you can prompt that, if you can get that to happen, and the way you simply do it is turn your story into their story. Make sure that they see that you exist for a reason. And if you can do that, I think you have a much, much better opportunity to get people to follow along, contact you again, and turn that 30 seconds or 40 seconds into something that's actually meaningful. Keep in mind, there are thousands and thousands of people out there this very moment giving an elevator pitch to someone. How are you going to be the one who's remembered? And I will tell you, you are remembered if you can answer the questions, why do you deserve to be in the cosmos? And why should anybody who you are talking to care? That, to me, is the core of what this term elevator pitch ought to be all about. You know, answering that question of what is that difference between a startup company and an already established and maybe huge company like Dow or like Microsoft or like Apple or like Google. Well, it's the difference between a subatomic particle and, you know, a 3 billion light year across cloud in the cosmos.
A nebula or something.
They're two different things. And I think there is a mistake to think that there's an easy jump from one to the other. First of all, most startup companies are not going to become that big thing. If you're going to be a startup company, be the best startup company you have. And look at incremental steps of how you can grow. Look at where you would like to end up. But don't immediately think that there's going to be this great leap that your startup is going to turn into something else. Focus on what is in your immediate range. Do that and do that well. And then you will find that opportunities will open up further and further along. But there is, I think, sometimes a delusional mistake of thinking too far out, thinking too far in the future. Because most companies are not going to become a Microsoft. There are only a handful that do that. And if you put all your eggs in that particular basket, I think there are other opportunities that you're going to be missing along the way.